What every brand needs to know about tariffs. I'm Anna Livermore, founder of V.Mora, where we help everything a fashion designer needs: sourcing, production, development, consulting on tariffs. To be honest, I have avoided doing anything on tariffs, only because by the time I do this, it could all be different and change. Like, it changes a lot. But I am going to give some advice and things that you need to know as a brand, as a designer today and always, to help you kind of figure out how to work with these tariffs, work around these tariffs, and pivot if you need to. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of my videos on having alternative production facilities. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you're producing in China, you should also be producing in Europe, in nearshoring, or have at least a manufacturer that you've quoted out with that is familiar with your product. So if something does happen, you're not stuck. You're able to pivot quicker than if you had nothing to go off of. You're at ground zero, all your eggs are in one basket. One way to do that: have your patterns and samples done domestically so that you have those digital files and you're able to send a pattern, a digital pattern, a sample, a tech pack, all of that information to anywhere in the world, so that if tariffs come up and there is something where you're like, this isn't going to work, you're able to pivot. So some things that you need to know about tariffs is, well, you're paying them. As a small brand, you are paying tariffs. When something crosses, you're shipping something from China to you, you are paying that tariff. That is on raw goods, it is on production, it is on anything that you are importing. What we could really use from the government, if they are going to have these really high tariffs on importing goods from China or other countries, is if we're importing the raw goods, that we don't have to pay those tariffs. They do this in Canada, so I know it's possible, but let's say that I have a client that's like, okay, great, we're gonna make the product domestically. We are going to do the cut and sew in North Carolina. Perfect. We are not making these fabrics. We don't have the mills. We don't have the technology. We don't have the skill set or the trained technicians to work these equipments. To build that is going to take 15 years. It's going to take a lot of money and time. So in the meantime, we do have the facilities to do the cut and sew. A lot of the machinery from when we were creating all of this in the 80s and 90s is still available. Yes, we will need to invest in technology. Yes, we will need a trained workforce, but we do have manufacturers here that can do a lot. But that fabric we're importing from China, right? And if that fabric is going to have an import tax of 154%, it doesn't matter that we're doing the cut and sew. Well, it does, because the cut and sew will be more expensive than it is in China. The minimum wage in China is anywhere from $240 to $370 per month. And yes, they are expected to work 40 hours with overtime of anything more than 40 hours. So that works out to about $1.20 to $2.70 an hour. I think I'm just making up the math, but you get my point. So $1.20 is the minimum wage. Here in the States, we are averaging about $15 per hour for minimum wage. So obviously that depends where. A lot of factories are in California and in New York, which has the highest minimum wage. So we're looking at more the $17 or $18 per hour, which when we're looking at China, we're looking at $1.20. So that's, almost 15, 16, 17x what we're at China. So when we're using that as how we are coming up with the cut and sew price, it is 15x of what that price would be in China. So we need to keep that in mind. And I'm only talking about the labor. The labor alone is going to be, okay, I'll for blanketing across the United States, let's say 10 to 15x minimum wage for what we have in China. So that's just the labor. Now, if we're talking about importing the goods, importing the fabrics, the zippers, the linings, the interfacings, all of that, then now having a tariff of whatever it looks like. Right now, we're at 35% from China, but there was that 90-day extension of, it did go up to 144 or 154%. That extension is going to lapse at the end of August. So it may come back at 154%. We don't know. But regardless, you are then paying a tariff on the goods to be delivered to the factory domestically and a higher price cost per labor. So we need to take all of that into consideration as consumers. If we are on board for not importing, for becoming more self-sustained within the United States, we also then need to be on board for a higher price point for our goods. I don't know. I think that we need help, whether that is funding to invest in technology, funding to help train the workforce. Like I, for example, am fortunate enough to have been trained to do pattern making and sample making by a woman who had worked in the industry since she was 12 in Iraq. She was doing, I was working at a custom design shop, and I worked under her to learn how to do patterns and samples, and I was paid by the designer of the shop. Amazing. But as a small business owner now, I cannot afford to pay my staff to learn this skill because it takes a long time. I'd say 6 months to a year to learn the patterning and the sampling, and that's like full time, right? So like I can't afford to do that. And we live in New York, and most people can't afford to work as an intern to learn that skill. So we need some help in training the workforce if we are going to bring things stateside. We also need to invest in technology. The technology offshore is far surpassed what technology we have here within the States. So this is getting a little off topic from the tariffs, but things that we need to know and consider when we are looking at our price point and where we are going to produce and why. So yes, the designer, you, us, we are paying that tariff. There seems to be this misunderstanding that if we tariff China 154%, that China's paying us that money. That's not happening. It's the designer who's importing the goods that is importing the production. Like they're paying that tariff. Now there is a loophole, and if you are importing anything valued at $800 or less, the tariff is directly related to the cost of what you're importing. So when you're importing your production, you want to make sure to use your production price of $30 versus the value price of that retail. If you plan to sell that garment for $100, don't claim it at $100. You want to claim it at your production price because that is how the tariff is decided. Understanding these tariffs and knowing what you need to add into your price point is crucial, because if you don't have the tariffs built into your price and you're selling direct to consumer or you're even selling wholesale, you're losing money. So you need to know, I always put a placeholder. The placeholder has been 30% of the production cost. So let's say it's $30, I'll add $10 for tariffs. when you're working with your manufacturers, you'll want to ask them, is this price landed or is this FOB? So that means sometimes they will include tariffs, but now they used to include tariffs, but now with the tariffs being so up in the air, they are not able to include the tariffs into their price point. So that is something that you'll need to pay. So yes, up until now, I was adding 30% of the cost. I was adding 30% of the cost in an estimation of what the tariffs is going to cost, but we don't know what that is going to look like moving forward. But you need to be familiar, you need to know what those prices are, and you need to add those into your cost of your product. I know that that is going to put your retail price higher than maybe you had originally expected or wanted, but you cannot be a sustainable business and move forward and be profitable if you are not including everything that you put into that garment into your cost, because you cannot be losing money. You need to be profitable to be sustainable, to carry on. So you want to be sure that everything you put into that product is worked into the price of what the consumers are paying. I recently had a conversation with someone, a designer, who was all about sustainability, making sure that their employees were getting paid, that the factories were paying their employees, that they were following labor laws, that every single person, they were taking care of everyone in their supply chain, making sure that everyone was being paid fairly, and this was part of their business. And then when they were doing their retail price, guess what? They weren't paying themselves. And I was like, you're everything you stand for, you have now removed from yourself. You are now doing to yourself what is illegal, what there are laws against. So when you're doing your pricing, you need to make sure that you are also paying yourself. Yes, we want the factory workers paid. Yes, we want to make sure that everyone is getting a fair wage, and that includes you. So make sure that you are following labor laws when it comes to paying yourself. I always think that it makes sense to have price comparisons, and at V.Mora, we actually have a downloadable template and a little thing that you can buy that will show you what to expect, what a t-shirt costs in Asia versus domestic versus nearshore versus Europe. But you should know this for your brand. Do a price comparison of nearshore, domestic, Europe if you want, if that's part of your brand, it is more expensive, and then in China. So having that price ready to go, let's say that the tariffs make one country too high, you can say, oh, you know what? It would be cheaper for me to do in the Dominican Republic or in Mexico.